Hello, everyone, and welcome to the 2025 Write Hive Conference. As always, this conference is loaded to the brim with great sessions for writers, writing professionals, and virtually anybody of the publishing industry in general. Now, before we jump into this panel, I want to take a moment to kind of thank our host for coordinating this awesome event year after year. If you didn't know, Write Hive is a nonprofit organization run entirely by volunteers to provide the writing community with free and inclusive resources, events, programmings, connections, and just all things indie. Now, they operate year-round and thrive from support with attendees like you. So thank you all so much, and thank you to Write Hive for remaining dedicated to writing the future that we need. Now, this 2025 conference brings you to our session, Troubling Tropes, featuring our spectacular panelists, AP Hawkins, Camilla Andrew, Agoawike, Agoawike, and RJ Joseph. Let me start with everyone's introductions. So AP, you're at the top of my screen. I'm gonna let you start.
Okay. Thanks, Patry. Yeah, I'm AP Hawkins. I am a science fiction and fantasy author and editor with Tomeworks Editing. We're an editing collective that focuses on genre fiction and helping genre fiction authors make their writing the best it can possibly be. So, but I'm really excited to be here on this panel. I am getting over a little bit of a cold right now. So, I'm going to try not to cough on camera, but if I do, I apologize. But yeah, it's great to be here. Great to be talking with everybody today. So,
Wonderful. Glad to have you here. Camilla?
Hi, my name's Camilla Andrew. I write dark romantic fantasy fiction. I'm currently finishing off my trilogy, The Essence of the Equinox. I'm an independently published author at the moment. And yeah, that's the gist of it so far.
Perfect. Glad to have you here.
Hi, I'm Agoawike. I'm a adult speculative fiction author. Basically, I like to say that it means I write short stories with vibes for plot, and then novels that have just everything in them. And my debut novel is going to be published next year with Bindery Books.
Fabulous. And RJ?
Hi, so I'm RJ Joseph, and I'm an academic and creative writer, editor, and speaker. I write predominantly about and within the horror genre and about the intersections of race, class, and gender in the horror genre and in popular fiction. And I am always, always happy to be participating with Write Hive. I love you guys.
And we love to have you. Yeah, it's good to meet. I think we met like either last year or the year before. So it's always nice to see familiar faces. And that's one of the cool things about Write Hive is we all kind of stick to our community, and finding community is so important for writers. Now, when I thought of this panel, it was definitely, I'm sure we all have to admit that we have our favorite go-to tropes, but I personally never gave much thought to the idea of tropes that just give me the ick sometimes. So, I mean, it definitely brings me kind of like a great opening question for us is, how is it that we can identify tropes that as readers, writers, creatives, we would consider to be offensive or off-putting? Camilla, I'm going to start with you here.
Well, I have some kind of a purview of this perspective, strictly from being a Black woman and occupying science fiction and fantasy spaces. There is a lot of deeply ingrained anti-Black racism and misogyny that I've had to navigate, and it's kind of made me kind of against my will a bit more adept and fluent in gauging like what's offensive than I would be with than other people, especially white fandom. I would say that I still have my blind spots, like if it comes to racial groups that I'm not part of, sexualities I don't have, that kind of thing. I've had to kind of like educate myself. But I feel like coming in with that hostility, I had more of like I had more of a drive to like educate myself in that regard and learn more about it and like reach out and from to others' perspectives. So that's basically what I would suggest. Hearing others' perspectives, being open to like hearing other points of view and from other people from other walks of life from you.
AP?
Yeah, I agree with that wholeheartedly. I think that, to identify tropes that could be considered or off-putting, we all have our blind spots. And obviously I'm coming at it from a white woman's perspective. And so you do have to be willing to put in the work to educate yourself about other perspectives and be open-minded to what other people experience of the world and of your work and how they feel when they read your work. Um, and I think that, if you read with a critical eye, if you put in the work to educate yourself, you read with a critical eye, you can identify things like Patry, like you said, things that give you the ick when you're reading. That's always like a red flag, right? When you're reading a work and you're like, this doesn't feel, something here does not feel right. That's your sign to like dig into that a little deeper and figure out why it doesn't feel right.
Um, Everybody's like given pretty much exactly what I would say, but also um, when you're reading, especially in fiction, you can't just read fiction alone and expect to know which tropes are have a history of like offensiveness or being off-putting or just based in stereotypes. I feel like many people use fiction as an escape without acknowledging that fiction and reality cannot be inseparable. So by closely relating fiction to real life, I believe that's a way for you to like at least acknowledge that sometimes what's in these works is not just tropes, but stereotypes and like all sorts of negative perceptions of people that become what we call tropes.
RJ?
Yeah, I think that in my circles, I've become known as the intersectionality foghorn because I'm always saying, listen, listen, we need to think about all these intersections. And I think that that's one thing we can do is understand that every human experiences our life journey carrying different lanes. And so we often occupy more than just one lane. So, yes, I'm Black, but I'm also a Black woman. I also have what would be considered disabilities, right? And so I think that if we think about intersectionality also, that would really help when we start thinking about these tropes and why they might give people the ick in the first place.
Awesome. Yeah, I definitely agree with what we've kind of all established of being able to be honest with yourself, not as a reader, as a writer, but as a creative of what doesn't like work for you. And then I come from a communication background, and then we have this concept called the narrative paradigm, where we're all natural storytellers. So I definitely believe and buy into the concept that we find our identities by building these houses of stories. Like we are a collection of stories and we house those stories internally. Um, but you have to be honest with yourself as a writer and as a reader as to what you're willing to accept and not willing to accept. So then kind of leading into the second question, if you're not an honest reader or an honest writer, perhaps, what do you think are the ways that we can avoid including troubling tropes into our work, and particularly in genres that will use them a lot? Like, what are some suggestions or tips to be able to avoid including those troubling tropes? AP, I'll start with you here.
Okay. We've already talked a little bit about, putting in the work to educate yourself about, how other people see the world. And I think that is really important. Being mindful of how your work could be perceived by others. And self-editing is a very important step of the writing process. And I think that you have to be able to look at your own work with a critical eye and think, is what I'm saying here, could this be harmful to someone else? And if it could be, how can I fix it, right? And I think that, if you are aware of your own blind spots, even after, you're trying to educate yourself, you're making an effort, right? Sensitivity readers are also really important. So definitely, if you are aware, like I have this really, big blind spot that I feel like I can't really get over, definitely look into sensitivity readers for your work, because they can be very helpful in terms of helping you avoid, not just tropes, but, stereotypes and things like that you might be including unintentionally in your work.
RJ?
I think it's really important for us to, first of all, be wide readers, right? So, like, if you're going to want to have characters who are, let's say, queer in your work, you should be reading work by queer writers. We should also be engaging with different groups of people from different paths without taking over their stories. I think that that's a really important thing. There's times when we do not need to be the main character, when we need to sit in the audience and observe, right? If we observe honestly and authentically, we will understand that, that any different group is not a monolith. And so even if we meet one disabled person, we might meet the next one person who would be totally different. And so I think we need to stay open to that, not just education, but to those experiences. So like actually engaging with the communities, right? As opposed to speaking for these communities or speaking down to these communities.
UM?
The first thought that came to my mind in this question was asking yourself before you even begin writing, why do you need to have this specific trope? So often, especially in genre fiction, we're regurgitating what we've seen in other genre fiction rather than considering what's important for this story that we need to write. We're not asking ourselves, why has this trope existed in this type of story before, rather than asking myself, what can this trope do for my story? And I feel like that is something so important to consider just even before you begin writing, just taking it down and really getting into the details of what this story needs and how these tropes can either help or not help your story if you have to include them.
Camilla?
I think just introducing a bit of nuance, I think acknowledging that sometimes if you are including a troubling trope, but you're trying to explore the trope rather than just portraying it straightforwardly, then that's also something that you need to be conscious of. It's kind of like a lot of times, especially if you're from a marginalized group, you might include, say, an angry Black woman stereotype, but it's not for the specific purpose of portraying an angry Black woman, but to explore the ways that that perception impacts someone's life as a Black woman existing in like predominantly white countries and things like that. So I think that there is definitely a nuance here where it's like you can include the trope as long as you have a purpose behind it. It's all about purposeful and sensitive inclusion, I think.
I also have something to add on
Go
to
ahead.
what Camilla said. Especially if you're coming from the same background as the trope stereotype originates from, I also don't think you necessarily have to explain yourself why you're using the trope. Like for the angry Black woman trope, personally, I actually kind of like that trope. So when I use it, I don't feel the need to like explain to other people why I'm using it, because other Black women will see what I'm trying to do with the trope and see that I'm not coming at it from a necessarily offensive position, but I'm coming at it from someone who looks like a Black woman and understands.
Wonderful. Yeah, and so it's all definitely interesting of how we put so much into the research process as writers, that we have to consider so many different things, and then our audiences may not even catch some of those things, and they may not catch some of those themes, or they will catch one really kind of offshoot detail and then just run with it and like rewrite the narrative for you. But when we're thinking about finding these tropes, why do you guys think that it's important for us to identify when we have troubling tropes within our works or within the narratives of our genres? So I'm going to start with you on this one. Why is it important?
For me personally, I just don't want to, when I'm writing, I don't want to hurt my readers intentionally. Obviously, I want to hurt them emotionally and I want to put them through the ringer, but I don't want to write something that demonstrates that not only do I not care about them, I am willing to use their like experiences or their negativity tied to this trope to make a story that I want to write. And that just doesn't feel right to me. And I just think that it's important to acknowledge that people are hurt by these tropes and acknowledge that when you're using them, you are delving into a world of complex discussions that you may not even necessarily be a part of, or that you have to navigate with a lot of care.
AP?
I mean, yeah, I agree with what said. You know, from a writer perspective, I'm not setting out to hurt anybody on purpose, except emotionally. You know, and I would hope that, and, you know, it might be a naive hope, but I would hope that, you know, as writers, no one is setting out to be offensive on purpose, right? Um, but, you know, being able to identify those tropes, you know, can help you ensure that your work is not being perceived in a way that you didn't intend for it to be perceived. And so, you know, and can help you make sure that you're not including troubling tropes by mistake. You know, from a reader perspective, being able to identify those kinds of tropes can help you like read with like a more critical eye and make informed decisions about authors whose work you support. Like if you see these tropes cropping up again and again in an author's work, and they're not being examined by the narrative, they're just existing as a matter of course, then as a reader, you can make a decision of, you know, whether you want to keep supporting that author or not. So,
RJ?
I think it's really important. I think that mentioned this a little bit ago, that sometimes in certain genres, these tropes can be helpful, even if they're harmful. So as a horror writer, I think if, you know, first of all, I'm always centering the Black feminine perspective, like whether that is, you know, as a monster, as the victim, or as the creator. I think it's really important to understand how those tropes will or will not serve your story. And so I love that trope also, the angry Black woman, because I'm thinking if you're going to be a monster and you're going to be eating people, you kind of probably need to have a little anger there. It just doesn't really work otherwise, you know? And so I think that it's really important to just go back to the craft of storytelling. Like, why is this here? Does it really serve a purpose? And if you can find a way that those characters can be interchanged, like they can literally be anybody, you have to kind of examine, well, why did you make it that particular person?
Camilla?
The emotional component was already mentioned, but I feel like a lot of people underestimate that including these tropes can, or stereotypes can weaken the story narratively. It makes for a less interesting, less courageous, less complex story overall, I think. Like when I notice characters who play into certain tropes, like say there was a disposable Black female character that was introduced and she was immediately killed, or her narrative was derailed to serve the white protagonist story. I always think that it was a waste of potential. And I feel like if that character was allowed the space to be fully fleshed out, it could have enriched the narrative a lot more and introduced a lot more possibilities for the story. And so I feel like when writers play it safe that way, they lose out on like what the story could have been.
It's definitely being able to recognize those opportunities lost, right? I think in communication, we often talk about how we have miscommunication or malcommunication when the audiences don't interpret things the way the speaker or the creative wanted. And I think as authors, like you put your interpretation into your story and you send it out there and you hope the readers get it. And so it's always that worst feeling of if they don't see it or read it the same way that you did. But that's like our own challenge that we have to go through in that creation process. So when we're thinking about this creation process, and then so we've clearly talked about how it's important to identify these, we want to avoid it. How do you think that we can, as writers, identify tropes that are less explicit? So things that are maybe kind of off the cuff. Examples that we have were things like coded villains or New World Order conspiracies, alien monocultures. How do we make sure that we can identify these tropes that aren't out there blaring and so obvious, not just for ourselves, but for our readers as well? So RJ, I'm going to start this question with you.
Yeah, well, I think that we want to start, first of all, identify what the trope is doing, but not just what it's doing, but how it's going about doing that thing, right? So, like, not just the purpose, but the actual process in creating. Okay, so this is the part where I am creating, let's say, character nuance. Right. I think that it's really, really critical that we understand that every character is not going to be exactly the same. And if we're going to have some of these troubling tropes, we really, really better have a good reason that where it makes sense to include that. I know as a creative, I'm always thinking, well, do I really want for this monster to be, you know, this middle-aged Black woman? Well, I absolutely do. Why do I want that? Well, because middle-aged Black women are usually invisible, right? Who better to be the monster? Like, who better to be the serial killer than me? You're not looking at me. Like, I'm disposable, right? So I think that there's a way to play around with these tropes as a creative to use. I think Camilla said it, to actually live up to the potential of the story.
UM?
Um, as coming to it as a writer, I also would give people a little bit of the benefit of the doubt. That perhaps sometimes these lesser explicit ones aren't necessarily on purpose, even though they could be used for dog whistly purposes. I'm thinking of it, maybe if the author is gay or queer, the coded villain is on purpose or something like that. Like, I'm trying to give them the benefit of the doubt, but if it turns out that it's something that's very like seeded throughout the work, something that's very insidious, as we often see, like using this excuse, like, oh, it's just fiction, or oh, that wasn't the point. Um, as someone reading, I would also look to the author to help identify these tropes. Like, what does the author say? How does the author
Mhm.
speak about these topics? And are they doing it? Are they putting these tropes in their work on purpose to be sly, or are they doing it unintentionally, or are they just not educated? Like, what are they actually doing as a person with their work?
Oh, that is an excellent point, I love that. That's excellent.
Camilla?
I think what's also important to acknowledge is that not every reader is approaching your work in good faith.
Mm.
And if you are encountering certain critiques, then I would interrogate the source of that critique. Where is that coming from?
Mhm.
Is the person critiquing the work actually coming from the demographic that they are like speaking on behalf of? Like, what are their intentions by pointing out this critique? Is it with the purpose of actually pointing out the criticism of the work, or do they have other intentions that they're not being upfront about by mentioning it? Like, for example, you see this all the time in fandoms. Like, everyone wants to, like, whenever there's a ship war, everyone wants to weaponize, oh, racism, oh, misogyny, blah 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 blah. But it's not actually about that. It's about a ship war. And so I feel like being conscious of that is important.
Yes. Oh my gosh. Yes.
AP, anything to add on how we can
Um,
identify those?
Yeah, I think everyone has really hit the nail on the head here. I think y'all have all had amazing points about this. I do agree with what Camilla just said. It's important to note with certain critiques where it's coming from. But there are um, certain red flags that you can look for when trying to identify these less explicit tropes. And you have mentioned, a little bit, if something is starting to feel like a caricature, obvious red flag, if there's, unexamined, like bigotry that's unexamined in the narrative, that's a red flag as well. And so if you read with a critical eye and, like RJ mentioned before, reading widely, being familiar with, where all of these kinds of stereotypes and tropes can come from, then that I think puts you in a good position to um, be looking out for, these kind of less explicit tropes.
Definitely. Yes. You put the onus on the reader to make sure that they are critically looking at your messages. So as someone who writes for children, it's a lot harder to teach that. And so I can't over assume that the kids are going to understand or catch on to these themes. So it's definitely my responsibility as the author to make sure that I'm not sharing or intentionally putting these hurtful messages in. Or if you do, and if I do put something in and I make a character a certain way, that there's a reason for it, that hopefully doesn't go above their head and assume that it's not supposed to go above their head. But when we think about the tropes that we do end up including, and if and when we do incorporate troubling tropes, what do you think that troubling tropes reveal about societal biases, right? So now we're kind of looking at what's the audience's responsibility for it and what biases do we show when we have it. So Camilla, I'm going to start with you here.
I think that it shows that as a society, even though we've made a lot of progress with regards to tackling bigotry, that there's still a lot of leftover tension and animosities within certain groups, especially when it comes to things like race and sexuality and gender. So I feel like having these tropes baked in is kind of reflective of the fact that we still have a lot of work to do, and also a lot of people are sort of comfortable not really interrogating the scripts that we've been ingrained with, like in society in general. Like it's comfortable because a lot of people, especially if they benefit from these narratives, don't like want to dismantle them. They don't like what it says about themselves or about the world. So I think that's what it betrays. Like a lot of people just have like a very cowardly, self-centered, solipsistic way of viewing the world.
RJ?
I remember getting a critique of my first collection, Here Hell Hath No Sorrow Like a Woman Haunted, where I don't know who the reviewer was, but one of the comments was that there was a lot of Black female trauma happening in the book, right? And that it was a bit disturbing. And as a horror writer who thinks it's important to educate people, that was my goal. Like, yes, are you disgusted by the fact that, you know, these enslaved Black women were literally raped in order to increase inventory? That disturbed you? Excellent. I wanted it to disturb you. Maybe we can keep that from happening again. And so it's very intentional. It's very purposeful. And I think that when the audience has these critiques, I mean, again, with horror, I feel like it's kind of easy. It's very easy, right? It's like my goal is to disturb you, to unsettle you, to make you kind of squirm in your seat and go, "Oh my gosh, did she really have to go there?" So yeah, but I mean, it's all about intent, and I am intentionally doing this so that the audience has to face it head on. There are some things that are easy to sweep under the rug when we get a sanitized version. But when we get the brutal truth of it, I really think that that's my job as a writer, to show exactly how horrific these things are.
AP?
Yeah, I absolutely agree with RJ here. I think those kinds of reactions and feelings, as writers, part of our job is to force people to confront trauma and feelings and, you know, societal biases and and so, you know, when we're doing that with intent and we can make our readers have the reaction that we intended, that's a success as an author. Like, you know, this is exactly how I wanted you to react to my work, you know, and you know, that's absolutely a win. And so I think that you know, it is important to examine the important things. Because again, like RJ said, you know, these things can easily be swept under the rug. We can forget. And you know, I personally, I don't think we should forget, because in forgetting we can repeat our mistakes. And so, you know, yeah, it's part of our job as authors to make sure that we're examining uh, the worst parts of not only society but also ourselves. So
UM?
Um, everybody else said it like much better than I could, but just sort of building off what RJ said. Also just thinking about in reaction to certain troubling tropes, why do some get more reaction from people than others when they're all troubling? Like, it also reveals, I believe, the idea that people think that some issues are more important than others. Like, let me make this better. So people might go up in arms about barrier gaze, the trope, but they might be more angered about that than the angry Black woman or the magical Negro trope. And that shows that people don't necessarily, like, obviously anti-Black racism is it's everywhere. But the fact that people react strongly to one than the other, so that people also don't necessarily care as much about these troubling tropes as they claim to. Because if they would justifiably spread their anger around. And it just echoes how, obviously in society, people just care about more about one thing than another. It's just like they're just mirrors to each other, I believe. And that's why, like, fiction, reality, you can't separate them. But I hope you understand what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, yes, because we are trying as writers, you want to, especially for young adult, new adult, for adult fiction, this idea that you want to ask those hard questions and you want people to feel that sense of discomfort and that sense of dissonance sometimes, because if you didn't, then your story is just flat and then no one's going to want to read it at all. They're like, okay, well, it's already following a formula. Why do I want to read this? But even if you think, I think I just had a chat with another panelist who talks about the representation of disabilities, right? So how we are an ableist society, and that clearly shows your bias, and how you wouldn't even think of certain things, like how is somebody in a wheelchair going to get around in this story or in this world and in these things, and the fact that we exclude them, right? You are communicating something and playing on a particular trope. So in comm, I always say, I start my first lecture saying one cannot not communicate. So the things we include and exclude from our stories are always going to be communicating something. There's some kind of message being sent there. So definitely knowing how to use those tropes intentionally, even if we're going to turn them, is a core message. And it's a lot of work and energy and effort and emotional stress and that we put on ourselves to do it. But yes, knowing that those tropes will reveal those biases is very important. So next question for the group then. What are the best resources to help us as creatives to be aware of these problematic tropes? I know we've all kind of talked about reading widely, being just conscientious of their existence, but are there where can we go for resources to make sure we're not falling into the use of these problematic tropes? So AP, I'm going to start with you.
Okay. I mentioned sensitivity readers before, and I'll mention them again here. I think they are a very important resource to help with those tropes. I have a couple others that I like. I do really like the Writing with Color Tumblr blog. That I think is a fantastic resource for helping white authors in particular, but everyone too, right? To be inclusive without unintentionally falling into stereotypes. Also, the book Craft in the Craft in the Real World by Matthew Salassis. It deals with examining like how our cultural environment shapes the way that not only we write, but the way we teach others to write. And so I really like that book. It was recommended to me by a critique partner, and really excellent book, great book. So,
UM?
I'm gonna second the sensitivity readers because I especially paid sensitivity readers because you need to pay people for like the effort they're putting into examining your work. I had a couple a few years ago and they were just so helpful in actually helping me identify the ingrained biases I had when I was writing a certain ethnic group. And I'm actually gonna give an anti resource. Do not use TV tropes as your guiding light. Because that website, it does not help you identify the troubling tropes. It describes them. It may sometimes talk about how these tropes have affected the real world with their real world section at the bottom. but it does not it's not a good resource to actually like examine and critique the use of these tropes in works. It'll identify them, but it will not help you understand why they exist. And I just don't want people to think, oh, I'm writing a story, so I have to go and find which tropes I want to put in or which tropes appeal to me or readers. You have to, when you're dealing with troubling tropes, first and foremost, identify what is the point of this narratively? Like Camilla said, like how is it going to affect the narrative? What opportunities are there for you to use this in the narrative? Don't just put a trope, a troubling trope, especially in because I need this trope. This is part of the genre.
Camilla?
I would suggest just broadening the wide range of things that you consume, especially like from a non-fiction perspective. I know like we're all genre writers here, but I feel like non-fiction is an underrated resource that is very useful. Like I read a lot of essays, I watch a lot of documentaries, I read like personal essays and memoirs and things like that, and I feel like just adding that in just helps like broaden my perspective and gives me more like a more well-rounded view of like the world in general than I would otherwise if I just stuck to reading research about writing.
RJ?
I really value actual conversations. So like we live in a time now that is really unprecedented in the access that we get to other people's conversations. So for instance, on social media, I follow a lot of activists. And when I say activists, I'm talking disability activists, race activists, class activists. And so like for one very interesting conversation that I saw recently on Twitter, there is a disabled activist who was talking about sexuality. And when I say the uproar that she faced just because she is a wheelchair user, it taught me a ton about like when you have romance novels or you have erotica, why would you not have, why would you not have a wheelchair user attending a play party? Like, why not? Like she could totally do that. And so these real life conversations and watching and seeing what people react to, how people react to different things, that's been invaluable because activists are already practiced in being loud, right? And so you get to learn very quickly, hey, don't do that. This thing, don't do this thing.
Right. That's such an interest. Like you wouldn't think of it, and then it makes me think. Like my husband, he always follows. He's a big on argumentation. So from communication, he's more of a communication, argumentation expert. So it's this idea that when you build diverse teams, like you want to have contradictory opinions in your team
Yeah,
to get the best
yeah,
ideas, because through that
yeah,
conflict, the best ideas are going to rise. So he
exactly.
definitely follows people that he clearly opposes just to be able to
Mhm.
see what are they saying on the other side? What is the rhetoric
Exactly.
being spewed? Because how am I going to combat this argument if I won't even
Mhm.
willingly listen to that argument? So
Right.
props to him for being able to do that. I'm like, I
Yes.
don't want that stuff on my timeline, so I will let him filter it for me. Because I'm like, I don't want to follow any of that stuff. So you tell me what it is, and then I'll make my own opinions on it. But being able to engage that other side, and he just likes arguing with people in general. So knowing that you hear those other opinions, it's helpful and it can help you feel more grounded. So like Camilla, yeah, you said, you have to be able to look at that other side and show people the way as creatives, right? As writers, we want to be able to say, okay, well, there's a way to open that, to cross the bridge or put your hand out to maybe lean into their opinions and understand what they're trying to come from, because we're so combative now in society that it's just like, no, it's all about my opinion. And the more narcissistic and arrogant you can be, the better. I don't care who I step on. That's like the image that we have now, and that's the way we go. So we want to be able to hear the other side. Hopefully, great resources and suggestions. I'll be sure to drop those books and those tips inside the chat there. So our last question that I want for us to be able to discuss is, what are the pitfalls to watch for when we're attempting to subvert troubling tropes? So pitfalls that we're going to get into, how do we know that they're there? So I'm going to start with you.
Um, sometimes when you're subverting, I mean, everybody loves subversion these days. It's all about subverting, but sometimes the subversion of a trope is a trope in itself. None come to mind right now. Um, oh no, actually one does. Like, for example, you don't want any of your Black characters to die, so you give all your Black characters plot armor and everybody else dies. And it's like, okay, you've saved your Black characters, but at the expense of the story you're trying to tell. And while some people might find that enjoyable, as a writer and a reader, that would not be a story that I would enjoy reading, because like it shows me that not only are you too cowardly to actually give any of your Black characters a struggle, you're too cowardly to consider that sometimes certain characters need to die regardless of their skin color or regardless of their ethnicity. It shows me that you are too afraid of the reader's reaction to come at this from a confident writer perspective.
And just because we're all part of the same ethnic group doesn't mean we're all on the same side.
Exactly.
RJ, pitfalls to watch for.
Well, so to kind of piggyback on what was saying, understanding that avoiding the troubling tropes does not mean to do like a total 180 to the point that nothing is recognizable. But also, I think that it's really important for us to almost, I hate to say keep a list, but almost keep a list of like those things, like places where we've seen these things done poorly. Right. And that's not like a list that you publish. Like, I'm not advocating putting folks on blast. I mean, I'm talking in our own personal workspaces, right? Like, we all can think of times that we saw things that were terrible. And I think that being able to look at that list and refer to it kind of goes, okay, wait, so if I'm going to have the same sort of situation, let me remember what not to do so that I don't fall down that same path. Also, one of my own personal mantras is that until everybody can play every position in stories and the world, we have not achieved equality. And so think about the fact that if you have the Black woman who is a monster, I mean, like, that actually serves a purpose of diversifying monsters. Like, monsters are very powerful. Who wouldn't want to be a monster, right? So I think that that's another way to avoid the pitfalls, is it's understanding that including these characters, even if they're in positions or portrayals that you might get some flack for, like, understanding your intent is, I want everybody to play though. So that means everybody takes turns being the monster,
AP?
Yeah, I think and RJ have made really good points on this. I think the first thing that I thought of when I read this question for pitfalls to watch out for is falling into another one. So that is something to watch out for. I mean, said it. You have to kind of look out for, if you're trying to make an othered group not be othered, you have to watch out for not othering them in a different way, right?
That's great.
So,
yeah.
And we've kind of I think kind of a thread that has emerged from our conversation is that there is such a thing as bad representation. And so you kind of have to be careful when you're trying to be inclusive and be representative in your work. You have to be careful that you're not falling into a bad representation.
Camilla?
I would say more authors should try to think things through to the logical conclusion, because I see a lot of discourse, especially nowadays, regarding like female protagonists and saying, oh, I don't want female protagonists to be sword wielding and sassy and violent and blah 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 blah, and it ignores the fact that, first of all, we really don't genuinely have gender non-conforming female protagonists, like actual masculine women like heading the narrative. And also, like, sometimes a lot of the discourse veers towards becoming very reactionary and playing into like playing into tropes and gender stereotypes that we've been trying to avoid and fight against as women, like the idea that we're all meant to be like delicate and soft-spoken and feminine. So I just feel like, you know, a lot of more authors have to like kind of think about what they're trying to say here.
Awesome.
And
Yeah.
also, just
Go ahead.
acknowledge that I think more people should think about, are you actually rebelling against the trope that is troubling, or are you rebelling against the online sentiment of it? Because the reality is not a lot of people in the real world actually know about these tropes. So you might think like, as like all of us here are either women or women presenting. So you might, from an outside perspective, that might be, oh, all publishing is women. But in reality, we know that's not the truth. So we have to consider that the tropes or the things that we're thinking about, like rebelling against or subverting, are not actually as prominent as they might appear to a reader.
Yes, definitely. Like kind of extending on the cons, like what AP said about bad representation. You know, writing isn't a PR game. Like PR in the rule of public relations is all press is good press, right? Good news, bad news, as long as your name is in the headlines, that's amazing for the brand. That doesn't work for tropes. That doesn't work for our storylines and our themes. So there is bad representation where you try to go so far in the opposite side, like UM is saying, that is its pitfall in and of itself. Movies trying to, like, when you're talking about it, I watch too much I watch too much TV, but I always think of the uproar with the Bet adaptation, which was Netflix's new series adapting Kakegori, which is like a gambling anime. And then we were, you know, they're like, as much as people didn't like it, it was like #1 in their viewing. And then my daughter's like, yeah, because everybody's hate watching it. And so this goes back to this idea that you don't always watch things with the right intent or read things with that honest intent. But watching it, listening to, seeing how they made the adaptations, things end up becoming parodies of themselves. So that's definitely the biggest pitfall when we think of, oh, I'm doing something revolutionary, I'm trying to attack this trope, make sure that you don't end up becoming a parody of it. Just like it makes me think of reality stars in general becoming parodies of themselves to do this. Awesome. Well, my last kind of off the cuff question then is, what are your recommendations, or like, what is your advice to somebody to make sure new writers who are trying to navigate this, what's your one piece of advice for them to make sure that they're working conscientiously towards avoiding or using properly the concept of troubling tropes? So I'm going to start, Camilla, I'll start with you, and I'm going to go around.
I think it's important to just acknowledge that the characters you're creating, if you're trying to create dimension, try to approach them as if you're trying to create dimensional people. And I feel like if you approach your characters as a three-dimensional person, it will inevitably lead less to like a troubling trope or just like a stereotype. Like if you are creating a gay character that does eventually die, as long as that narrative serves them as if they're not just like they don't exist just to die, that they're a genuinely like fleshed out character, I feel like it would make the audience respond better to the death than if it was just like, oh, I don't care, here's the gay character and there we go, bye. So yeah, just being very conscious of that.
RJ?
I'd say get out of your own little bubble. Like, go outside, leave your town, go do something different, because you'll have these different experiences and you'll understand that there's more to life in general than just what you have right in front of you.
Go into it with intention. I'm not saying build a list of tropes that you want to include in your work and like detailed map out how you're gonna avoid every pitfall of every trope. But if you're especially writing a trope-filled genre, go into it with intention and knowledge that there are certain tropes that are just so commonplace that they might feel like they're scaffolding of the genre itself. But you, because you're thinking about, okay, I'm acknowledging that there are certain bad tropes and certain troubling tropes and certain good tropes, I'm more prepared to write. I'm more prepared when I'm going to perhaps encounter a troubling trope that I might have unconsciously or subconsciously put in my work.
AP?
Yeah, I would second what everyone has said so far, but especially second the intent. Be honest with yourself about what your intentions are with your work. And yeah, mainly that. And the other thing I was going to say was make sure you can look at your work with a critical eye. You know, self-editing is so important. And it's hard sometimes to look at your work with a critical eye. But you know, that's a skill that I think all authors need to develop, is being able to you know, be critical of your own work. And you know, find things that, you know, you may not be intending before your readers can find them. Right.
Yeah, it's definitely great advice. I mean, you spend so much time as writers learning and honing your craft, assuming, okay, well, I have to learn how to write this scene better. And you don't spend as much time learning how to critique, and being critical. So that's a great piece of advice that, you know, joining writing groups, having kind of seeing how you develop, and you have to build that critical eye. So that's all excellent, excellent advice for everyone. Well, that is the end of my list of questions for everyone. So thank you guys all so much for attending our Troubling Tropes panel. I hope you guys found it invigorating and as interesting as I did. Now, before I leave, I definitely want to give everybody in the panel a chance to kind of tell us, where can we find them? How can we support all of your work? So RJ, I'll start with here. Give me your plugs.
So I do have a website. It's rhondajacksonjoseph.com. Kind of has most of the information that you would know. I also haunt the social media platforms from behind at @rjacksonjoseph. I don't say a whole lot, but believe me, I see a whole lot.
Camilla?
So you can find me under my imprint, which is An Inkwell of Nectar. So that's aninkwellofnectar.com, and I am An Inkwell of Nectar on Instagram and TikTok. I'm also very inactive on Threads and Bluesky. I'm Inkwell of Nectar on X, but I don't use that anymore, so don't follow me there.
You can find me at my website, nebulouswrites.com, and that's also my Blue Sky handle. And that's all I have social media, because I do not like social media.
And AP?
Yeah, you can find all of my links at my bio site, which is bio.site/ahawkwrites. And so that if you go there, it'll have links to my writing and to my editing work. But you can find my editing collective at tomeworksedits.com as well.
Awesome. Well, wonderful. It was such a pleasure seeing everybody, chatting with everybody on this wonderful topic. So thanks again to all of our participants for attending. We will go ahead and be closing this event now, but if you guys have more questions, feel free to drop them into the discussion boards in the chat lounge, ask them in the question box, and please, don't forget to check out what events are coming up and support all of these amazing writers. So thank you so much, everybody. I hope you enjoyed it. Signing.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.